Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for one of our FSB national webinars. This one is titled A Business Culture for High Performance, Dealing with Underperformance, and is the third in a series of three webinars that we've been running. And we've been in partnership with our members, P3OD. So we've got Mark and Pamela from them joining us today, and they've been talking about creating a high performance culture and implementing a stakeholder approach to people management for business success. I'm Ruth Lambert, and I'm one of the development managers with the Federation of Small Businesses, and I cover Somerset and Wiltshire, and I'm really pleased to be part of this webinar today. If you do have any questions, please don't put them in the chat. I don't think that's going to be working today. Please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and then Mark or Pamela will be able to have a look at them and pick up those questions as they go on with their talk. So just brief introductions for our two speakers today, both, as I say, directors of P3OD. So starting with Mark O'Hagan, he's an experienced business consultant leading in business improvement across the private sector, local government and NHS health trusts. His experience includes leading businesses in their process improvement, developing staff performance and designing workplace training. He's currently working on developing local government strategy and delivering management qualifications to the NHS and providing coaching and mentoring to small businesses. Pamela Moffat is also a director at P3OD, and she works as a change and OD consultant to a range of businesses, and her expertise includes culture change, organisational diagnostics and data and business planning, HR strategy and restructures. So she works with leaders, managers, frontline staff, politicians and partners, and has won multiple awards in workplace transformation and leadership and digital change. So as you can see, they are very expert speakers today, so I'm confident that you will find this a very useful webinar. Today's session is being recorded, so don't worry about having to take too many notes. You will be able to watch the slides back via our on-demand page. So it'll be probably a day or two, and it'll be live there, and you can watch the session back as many times as you like. And the final thing I wanted to say before I hand over to Mark and Pamela is, if you're not an FSB member, we'd love to have the opportunity to speak to you further about all the different things we do for our members, in addition to offering these webinars. So please do visit our website at fsb.org.uk, and you can book a meeting there with a membership advisor. Not high pressure at all, just a chance to chat through the benefits and see whether FSB membership would benefit your business. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to Mark and Pamela for their time, and over to you, Mark.
Hi everyone, hello.
Morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Ruth. That was a really nice introduction. I'm just going to do some technology stuff, so just give me a second while I try and share the slides, and then we'll start the session. So hopefully we should all be able to see the first slide now. So yeah, as Ruth was saying, this is the third webinar that we've been sort of running, and it's all around business performance. So the first one was around culture, so how to really boost the culture of your organization, doing sort of diagnostics and things like that. The second webinar was to do with looking at how to set really clear goals and targets for your organization, how to monitor the performance against that. And today is really around people, looking at how to deal with underperformance in your organization. So it might be underperformance from the point of view of an employee or a customer or a supplier. The focus very much is around employees, but hopefully the resources that we share with you are something that you can use across all sorts of different settings and contexts. Just a quick thing to say, we won Start a Business of the Year last year, and the FSB have been fantastic in supporting us, actually. So if you're not a member already, definitely recommend joining. In addition to winning awards and access to these sorts of webinars, there are a host of resources, and a lot of things that we'll talk about with you today, you can actually access through some of the resource sort of areas within the FSB. So something definitely to think about. And then just to say, we are a supplier to local government, and we are a registered training centre. So over the last few years, we've collected a few badges, and they mean a lot to us, and we're really proud about that. So today really is to share some of our experience, some of our expertise, and hopefully there'll be a few things here that you will find useful. Probably won't spend too much on this, but just so you understand why us, why should we be sharing this information? No doubt you'll have loads of experience around this, so hopefully some of the stuff is new, but maybe it sort of also reaffirms some of your views. But we are specialists in human resources, so we work with organisations around HR policy, workforce planning, dealing with tricky employees, looking at mediation, and also resolution for companies. We have loads of experience in business improvements. That might be looking at process improvement, business planning, organisational change, organisational design, anything really to sort of improve the performance of your company. And we are also a training centre, so we run qualifications and do executive coaching and all sorts of things. So I guess our starting point really is people focused, but we look at trying to boost the performance of companies through all these different tools and resources. But we thought we'd start with a quick poll. So we quite like these. It's a little bit of fun really, but it will help us get a really good idea about the sorts of people who've joined the call today. No doubt some of you are sole traders, and maybe some of you have smaller, slightly larger teams of 3, 5, 10, maybe 50, maybe even beyond that people. So the first question is, how often do you have difficult conversations with employees? And then the second question we'd like to ask you is, how confident do you feel about having difficult conversations with employees? So we'll just wait a second for the poll to pop up, and by magic, thank you, brilliant team behind the scenes for doing that, really appreciate that. So we'll just wait a couple of seconds and then we'll talk about the results from that. What do you think the results are going to be, Pamela? Any ideas?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting. I think my experience, certainly as a senior HR professional, is that we tend to prefer not to have difficult conversations if we can avoid it. So I would say it probably happens less frequently than we would like.
Yeah, it is difficult. It is difficult.
And I'm guessing that probably because the vast majority of people are on this call, they don't necessarily feel very confident in having difficult conversations.
Maybe they're very confident, want to figure out, who knows? We'll have to wait and see. We're just going to wait a second. We can't vote. We're not allowed to. It has a big flashy red thing that says do not vote. So we're not going to. But hopefully most results are in. But I know there's quite a few people today. Okay, brilliant. How often do you have difficult conversations with employees? I need to talk these through because people on a webinar won't be able to see these results. So I'm just going to talk through them. So how often do you have difficult conversations with employees? There are 2% who have daily difficult conversations. 24% have weekly difficult conversations. 56% have monthly. 9% have never, and 9% don't manage people. And then the last question was, so the second question was, how confident do you feel about having difficult conversations with employees? So 7% very, so they're very confident about having that. 27% are confident. 58% are somewhat confident, so maybe sometimes you go into it feeling quite confident at times, maybe not. 7% not, and 2% don't have them. So any thoughts on that, Pamela? Anything that you're thinking initially?
I mean, I think the more you do it, obviously the more confident you become. That's the interesting one. So if you are not particularly confident or somewhat confident, hopefully some of the tools that we share with you today will help you to structure your conversations. So we'll give you a little bit more confidence. It's a tricky one, and I think for us, for me particularly, working sort of on the HR side of the business, the challenge is always we sort of deal with investigations when difficult conversations haven't happened. So we kind of oftentimes get called in when things have gone wrong and there's either a disciplinary or a grievance or a capability issue, and I guess we're on a mission to make these difficult conversations easier so we don't get to the point of sort of sticky, difficult employee relations.
So we've got a couple of questions in from the from the guests today. So there's what someone has said, you know, we can see the results. Actually, the reason I mention that is for those who are watching this recorded, they won't be able to see the results. I need to talk through them. So that just to clarify that. And then Tim Harris has said you need an option between monthly and never. Yeah, you're probably right. Actually, we probably needed to have something maybe quarterly or once in a while or something like that. But you know, these polls are sometimes imperfect. But good suggestion. We'll pick that up next time we run something like this. Okay. So let's go to, normally, if we could have people talking, I'd ask some feedback and things like this, but Pam and I will talk this through as though we've never seen this information before. So do you want to ask the first question, Pam? What do you know? Yeah, so
interestingly, I think oftentimes we don't realise the cost of not tackling difficult and challenging behaviour. So we just want to get a sense of what people believe to be the total UK cost of business per year of workplace conflict.
I find this figure insane. It's crazy. But just, you know, I thought maybe I don't know, 1 billion, maybe 2 billion in terms of just legal costs, frustrations, time out, disputes, you know, managers, etc. But it costs the UK business, this figure was from 2021, and the research behind this is provided at the end. So if you don't believe these figures, trust me, I've checked them out. But it costs about £30 billion per year. So it's a huge amount of cost to businesses. Now, you know, for us, smaller businesses, there may only be a small amount of cost to it, but, you know, it's a big problem. And then the second one, I think, which is interesting, is that, you know, comparatively, how much do we think sickness absence cost? Do you think it's more or less than you know, workplace conflict?
It's probably less, but still significantly high. I know the national average days lost to sickness absence is 4 days. Is it?
Okay, yeah, this is also quite high. I thought it was going to be a lot less, actually, but it's about 20.6 billion. There's a number of different figures, so obviously, you know, there's a range with these, but sickness absence typically costs UK businesses 20.6 billion. That's based on ONS data.
Yeah, and what we know is that where there is workplace conflicts, and I'm sure those colleagues that have joined us that do have businesses will see that correlation between workplace conflicts and sickness absence. So oftentimes, if an employee raises a grievance, and they don't believe that grievance has been dealt with, or it, you know, they're in a difficult situation in terms of a relationship with another colleague, then oftentimes they will take sickness absence. Yeah. And if it's paid, that's where the cost comes in.
I think the issue is that when there is a problem, you know, we get this legal cost of for a tribunal, it can be really expensive. Now, it's expensive for people taking the claims. It can cost about 15,000 on average for a typical employment tribunal, which often isn't covered by house insurance and stuff like that. But actually, there is a cost to the business, and maybe you've got insurance, but typically some research by a law firm was suggesting it costs about £8,500 for a business to defend. And that probably that only is the legal cost, not the stress and frustration and issues and time and worries. You know, it's a big cost to incur. So obviously that's kind of setting the scene of, oh, you know, it's expensive, it's problematic. Just looking at it from another point of view, around, you know, recruiting people into your business. You know, what is that cost? What do you think that cost is?
I would say it's probably about 3,000 somewhere.
Actually, it varies. So one bit of research said it costs about 10% of the salary. Right. Between 10 and 20% of the salary. So it could be anywhere between, you know, a few grand up to sort of 15,000, depending on the sort of person you're recruiting. But the reason I guess this is important in the context of performance is that, you know, if you do lose people as a result of, you know, a dispute or frustrations or challenges, not only is it going to cost you some money to possibly to defend yourself, then there's also the additional issue of, you know, the cost needed to recruit. And, you know, what's the percentage of organisations that use regular one-to-ones, do you think?
Well, I would like to say 100%.
Yeah, it's not though, is it?
No,
I think it's about 50% is 86% actually, sorry. So yeah, it's not too bad. That's not too bad, but there are 14% of companies that aren't doing this.
Yeah, but I think the interesting thing about that figure is that whilst 80% of highly engaged organisations use one-to-ones, and possibly the people who work in those organisations would say, yes, I am engaged. It's to what extent are they having those difficult performance conversations?
I think that's it. And we got some feedback this morning to say quite a lot of you are quite confident undertaking some of these conversations, but I guess that's that's what we're trying to explore here, is actually the implication of that. So work-related stress and mental illness accounts for over what of work absences?
I would say 60%.
Yeah, it's about 50%. Yeah, and that's that specific thing. Again, there's a conflict potentially in the numbers around sickness absence and then the cost of mental health. The mental health and work-related stress sort of the thing that includes is a bit more than just sickness absence. So it includes additional costs. But again, huge amounts of money, and lots of people really struggling. And we'll explore a little bit about that in a second.
And I think work-related stress and mental health is kind of in the top 3 of reasons, top related reasons why people are sick and absent from work. I think number 1 is non-work related stress and mental health, followed by COVID. Followed by work-related stress and mental illness. And then I think a lot of the other issues that we see with related to stress and mental health are musculoskeletal issues, are gastro-related, so stomach-related issues, often which are symptoms of stress. Yeah,
and my wife woke up this morning with like 3 or 4 messages from people who weren't coming into work today because of long COVID, because of some sort of sickness bug, and because of not feeling particularly able to come into work today. So I think it's something that we're experiencing all the time, and it's the same with our company as well. We again sometimes have difficulties with employees. Okay, I think I really like this quote. We'll try. Quotes are a funny one, aren't they? Because they can be a little bit sort of pointless, but this for us is something that really is quite important. If you treat employees like they make a difference, they will. And I think that is, I think that's really important. What's your view on that?
I mean, I think there's a point here, and my starting point is always nobody ever comes to work to do the wrong thing. I think naturally my preference is to trust people and assume that they will and they can. And I think, deal with the people that don't and won't, rather than kind of treat everybody in the same pool, really. And that's why you have HR policies, but my view is that they account for the lowest common denominator, and most people in their day-to-day work won't have to have a conversation about the disciplinary policy or the grievance policy, but they're there to support and protect everybody involved in employment.
So you've got a couple more questions, I think probably relate to the previous slide, but we have someone who's suggesting that, well, they're not suggesting, they're saying that hiring may take 27.5 days in the private industry, but can be 3 months in the public sector. I think actually 27.5 days is probably quite it's quite I think the reality is it often takes a lot longer than a month, irrespective of what sector you work in. It is especially at the moment, that it's really challenging place to find people, and even if you do find a good one, getting them to actually come to your company is quite difficult, and getting them to stay. And then Ian Kirkby said, sorry, I missed the sources of these stats. So the stats, all of the links to the resources and stats will be provided at the end of these slides. So when they go out, you'll be able to find those links. But a lot of the data came from the ONS.
And I think what's important about this quote, and we'll come on to the detail in a second, is that what we're trying to do in the workplace is create an environment where people can perform well. And I think oftentimes the analogy that I would use, it's like fish in a fish tank. So if the fish is, flapping around upside down, oftentimes we think there's a problem with the fish. Yeah. Why is the fish flapping upside down? Rather than saying, actually, what in the environment has made the fish swim upside down. So it could be the water, the lighting, the heating, the food. And so we often use that as a way of explaining to managers that sometimes people's performance isn't necessarily to do with something that they've done. It can be the environment or the conditions that are created that affect an individual's performance.
Yeah. Okay. So why is it so hard? So why do we find it really difficult to have difficult conversations with people? And actually, it's quite interesting because our company is led by us too, and actually we sometimes find this quite difficult. We don't necessarily want to have the difficult conversation to talk about, what have I done or haven't done this week, or what has Pamela done or hasn't done this week, or the approach that they might have taken. It's a really difficult one because we don't want to upset people particularly. But the first, I think, is fear. We're naturally, I guess, you probably describe it better.
Well, I would say this is around, it's that fight or flight, isn't it? We're not hardwired for confrontation, so our natural response is to run away from it. So oftentimes we're worried about, actually, am I going to have this conversation and somebody's going to be really angry or really hurt or upset about what I'm saying? And, instead of worrying about how somebody's going to react and respond, which they own, we don't own. I think this is a sense of, recognizing that you will feel some element of fear, but actually that's just a natural human behavioral response to a situation where you are anticipating some form of confrontation. And I think oftentimes we'll procrastinate, we'll put it to one side, we'll have that conversation next week, or give me a bit more time to think about it, rather than accepting that there is that fear, and that fear is a natural human process.
I think that fight or flight, happens in two ways. So you might try and distance yourself from it. Other times you might try and head towards it, and maybe not necessarily with the right approach. There's a real balance there. So the fight or flight is a bit of a tricky thing at times. This is probably the area that I struggle with the most. I do like to be liked. Pamela knows this, but it's the worry about being disliked by an employee, or a customer or a supplier. We don't want to be disliked, but actually having a difficult conversation can quite often have the opposite effect. It kind of puts you in a much better position with that person. So getting used to not worrying about being disliked, I think, is the key thing here. Now, if lots of people say they don't like you, then there's probably a bit of another issue going on there. But I think largely when you approach difficult conversations, it's that worry, it's that concern that you have. It's that slightly sleepless night before having that discussion that you really weren't looking forward to. So the next thing is, and hopefully we're going to share some responses, not sure how to approach it. What, in your experience, what have you noticed when people aren't sure about how to approach it? What have they done?
I mean, I think oftentimes when people aren't sure how to approach it, they've probably left it a little bit too late. So they might have seen something a couple of weeks ago, not called it out. Other team members have said, you're the line manager, why haven't you called that out? So I think, oftentimes it's like anything with people management, it requires planning, and we find ourselves saying this often, that as managers, if you're not making the time to manage your staff, then what are you doing? And obviously, we all know that as a manager, you're in a role because technically you're very good, you're probably the senior expert in the team, but actually managing people is a completely different task, and you have to make time to have these difficult conversations. And so there's something about really thinking through how you're going to structure the approach to the conversation to make sure, A, that it lands in the right way, and that, B, you get the improvement that you're looking for. I think my experience would be the single biggest issue when I get called in to do an investigation is it's been left too late, or it's just been left undealt with. Yeah.
So I think there's just knowing kind of key things to do, which are A, good for if things do go wrong. So understanding kind of the bits of paper and documents and evidence that you might want. But I think more importantly, having a really structured approach so you have quality conversations with people, so that when you do need to have a difficult one, it feels a little bit easier and a bit more consistent, rather than it being the difficult conversation.
I think the other area with that, and this is one thing that I've seen, is if managers aren't having regular performance conversations, and suddenly they've got this folder full of evidence where, you know, somebody's not been performing, or they might have folder full of emails where they've asked for something to be done and nothing's been done. If that's the first time you're having the performance conversation and you're going in with a folder full of evidence, then clearly that is going to overwhelm somebody, and their first response is, why have I not seen this before? And I think that can be it can be a bit of a failing for me. You know, you go into that conversation, suddenly you're presenting somebody with a whole load of evidence, then that is likely to create some confrontation. It's likely to create conflict.
And then the other thing that we sort of experience is, you know, who is the right person to have the conversation. Now, for smaller organizations, it's probably going to be you or me, or Pamela, but actually in larger organizations, sometimes there is an issue around actually who's actually going to have this difficult chat with this person, you know, and you know, who is responsible for the results of that, and who needs to be involved in this process.
I think an example here would be, as we move much more towards matrix management, that who question becomes more.
What's matrix management? So
matrix management is where you're managing a team, maybe around a project, who you don't line manage, but you manage for the purpose of a project. Okay. So you are responsible for coordinating. And, you know, that's where you get into the technicalities of, well, technically you manage that person. So you get that passing the buck. Well, no, you matrix manage them. Well, no, you line manage them. And it's knowing who is the right person to have that conversation with. So if you know that there's somebody who's particularly challenging, but actually have a really good relationship with somebody else in the team, it might be that somebody else in the team is in a better position to get a more positive response than the person that manages them. And I think don't be afraid to, you know, think about all these different, more creative ways of having the conversation. What's important is that they happen.
So what we thought we'd share with you now are just some examples. Now, you know, for all of these companies I'm going to share with you, you know, it's always a lens. So just because someone says it's a low trust, low performance organization, it is likely that somewhere in these companies there is the opposite happening. It just so happens when you look at some of the examples based on reviews from Glassdoor and by some and Indeed, and you know, if you're not familiar, by the way, with Glassdoor, that's a company, a website, a bit like Facebook or LinkedIn, but you can review companies. So if you've not seen Glassdoor before, go and have a look at that, because maybe your company's on there. But largely it's where, you know, I'd say slightly disenfranchised people would typically go first to sort of share their views. So just a bit of, I guess, a bit of an asterisk next to this next point, to say that these companies probably in some parts are really sort of performing well. But what did you find out about William Hill and Ladbrokes, who are, you know, both betting companies? What was the information about them?
I think the interesting thing here is, I think number one, they're dealing with quite tricky customers. Okay. And I think what we know from those companies is, because of the nature of what they do, their customers can be a bit more challenging. I think there are particularly long hours. Oftentimes people are working on their own, so there isn't somebody else in the office to provide support if they are dealing with a challenging customer. But I think there's a sense that it's quite a stressful working environment with quite long hours. So obviously pressures in terms of sickness absence, that creates them tensions between colleagues, and I guess a bit of a sense of passing the buck. So it's a bit like a hot potato. It's yours and it's mine, then it's yours.
Whereas with Holland and Barrett, there was lots of lone working, so people were often left in the store to manage the store on their own. And with that comes whole issues around sort of well-being and sort of that, you know, there's no sort of team spirit is there as a result of that, and it can be quite a solitary experience. So that did affect the perception of overall company performance and their interest in the well-being of their employees. But again, you know, equally there are some people who love that, so you have to sort of be a little bit balanced in that. The Financial Ombudsman Service, that is to do with just a lack of money, lack of capacity, so almost too much work. Yeah, and I think for us smaller businesses, that is kind of the
reality.
That's the reality. Not enough hours in the day. It's really difficult. So if you have got staff who are working with us, you know, and it really is, and this is something we found really and difficult actually, is balancing getting the work done with providing that support for our employees so that they feel really clear about what they're doing. And you know, we have quite frequent conversations which are recorded, but getting that balance right sometimes, especially during a really busy patch where you're sort of doing 15-hour days, is really difficult. But you know, financial officers really struggle with that, and again, over time, fine for a short burst, but over time that can really wear people down and affect things, and people get a bit cross and frustrated, and it's a bit problematic. JD Sports, just long hours, lots of pressure,
high turnover,
high staff turnover, so there's a lack of that, sixth absence, and Cafe Nero, very, very similar. So just kind of give you an idea that largely with these issues, it's to do with too much work, or you know, difficult work conditions, and maybe a failure to sort of really understand individuals and kind of the individual pressures that they're under.
And I think certainly when you read the reviews of these companies online and you actually go into the detail, because it's a bit like Trustpilot, isn't it? How many, you know, TripAdvisor, how many stars out of 5 would you give this organisation? Bearing in mind this information is in the public domain. So, you know, if disgruntled employees are moving on and they don't get the opportunity to tell you, they will absolutely go on to Glassdoor or Indeed, and they will tell everybody else. So it is always worth, if you're in a sort of medium-sized, even small business, always try and have exit conversations before people leave, because that's a public, you know, they're in the public domain, people can read. Oftentimes, you know, the words that people have used is around, we don't feel trusted, we don't feel supported, we don't feel developed.
Yeah, but just before we move on, a lot of these companies have issued statements, press statements, to say that they don't necessarily agree with that view. So just worth highlighting that. For litigation reasons. Okay, so there are obviously with every sort of system, there are some who are seen as worst performing, and there's some who are seen as really well performing. And actually, we've got a water company here, and I think maybe there'll be people going, really? Is that true? Yeah, I'd say with Taylor Wimpey, really? Well, there was this particular lens is from a graduate point of view. So this is from people coming into, you know, from university or from some sort of academic route, maybe doing apprenticeships. So it's kind of from that point of view, you know, what are these young people going into? What are they likely to experience in these companies? And what did you find?
So I think the common area in all of these was the sense of team and trust, and the trust between colleagues and the team working. I think I definitely was surprised by the Anglian Water, but actually when you read stories about it, you can see that they are developing a culture where people really take ownership and they understand the purpose of the business. They understand their role to play. People are trusted. People get the opportunity to innovate as well.
I think it's just a lot of this, just it would appear maybe it's just they've got a brilliant press machine, and the press machine's pumping out these positive stories, possibly. You know, when you go on Glassdoor and other things, there's less critical comments and there's more positive comments, so there's a bit of evidence there. You know, are they the best companies in the universe? We don't know, but they're just an example of where companies have put in really clear training programs, really clear sort of programs around well-being and support. Managers appear to be really good at managing people as well as getting the work done. There's progression opportunities, and overall the culture, i.e. how we think it is around here, they're obviously recruiting people who fit into that culture. So they're really good at spotting the right sort of people to work here. So there's kind of a lot of consistencies here. So they're obviously really clear about what they want, how they're going to train people, and where they want those trained people to go. So a bit more planned, I'd say, and a little bit more precise. But again, you know, Royal London, big investment company, so you know, they're picking at a certain type of young person compared to Ladbrokes, etc. So they're also working a slightly, I guess, different space in terms of recruitment and development. Okay. So that's kind of gives you an idea of, you know, why companies might sometimes be potentially more conflict, more cost associated with that conflict, and where actually companies with high trust and performance, what it can mean for their brand, and also holding on to people.
And actually, the great thing about the internet era is that you can actually, if you're sad like me, you can go on to Employment Tribunals UK and you can see all of the cases pending and cases decided upon, so you can have a look there. But it's always great to look at, you know, a case study and say, well, what are they doing? Why are they not experiencing this issue? But at the same time, look at cases where actually there are lower levels of trust and performance, to really understand why is that? What are they not doing that is really getting to the heart of the problem that they've got?
Now, I think we've got about 50 minutes left, Aaron. I suspect people want to know a little bit about what can I do about it.
Right, what can we do? Okay, so the common denominator, when you look at all of these reviews, the common words that come up are trust and respect. And I think this is really, really important. I know certainly when I do my work with businesses around HR is, you know, help us to build trust. Well, trust is there when people respect one another. And people's views and expertise is respected. I think a really important point here is that we know that we're in a national labour shortage. So for every job that you put into the market, you might get 50 candidates apply for that job, and you'll probably find that 99% of those applications you wouldn't shortlist. So I think it's safe to say it is a job seekers market. Job seekers will look at more than just pay. So they will use, certainly our younger generation will use Glassdoor, they will use Indeed to understand the culture of the organisation. So, you know, if you look at some of the organisations where they really labour on the culture, they will attract a certain type of person. So I think, you know, your unique selling point has to be, you know, is this an organisation where I will feel trusted, where I will feel respected, where my expertise will be valued, and where I can do my best work?
Yeah, one thing, if you have got a few people working, you know, in your company, then I'm sure you do run sort of employee engagement surveys, but something to definitely explore is trust. So, you know, on a scale of 1 to 5, do you trust your manager to support your progress in this company? You know, on a scale of 1 to 5, how well respected do you feel? You know, so these are very simple questions that allow us to really get an idea. And if you score sort of below, if you score a 3 or below, then there's something that you need to maybe explore with the staff, you know, have a chat about it. What is it that means that you don't feel trusted, or what is it that means that you don't, you know, necessarily trust your manager? You need to be open and honest about it, especially in today's sort of circumstances. So this is something that we have shared. We share an MBA program, actually, Salford MBA, and it's something that we use. We'll talk through it very quickly, but we can send this out, and if everyone's interested, we could maybe run a separate session on this potentially. But do you want to quickly talk it through?
Yeah, so this is something that we've used many times before, and actually what it does is it helps managers to really think about the assumptions that they make about people. So oftentimes what we see is that where there's low performance, there's low trust. So if you look at the, it's a bit like a stakeholder matrix, and what we encourage managers to do is to plot their staff on this axis, to think about, you know, where I've got high performance, are the levels of trust higher, and therefore what goes well in that relationship, what conditions allow these individuals to perform well? Why do I trust them more than I trust the people who are in the sort of bottom left? So it really helps managers to unpick some of the assumptions that we make. So where we've got people who don't feel trusted, the chances are they won't be performing particularly well. So where people do have high performance, they feel trusted, they feel respected, what we'll do is see higher levels of performance. So I think it's just a really good way of kind of unpicking, why do I not trust this person?
Yeah.
What is the reason why? Is it because they've let me down before? Why have they let me down? So I think it's a really good exercise just to sit and think about the people in your team, and think about, you know, if you've got people who you have a high trust relationship with, but you're not getting the outcomes. Why is that? What in the relationship means that I really trust this person, yet we're not seeing the outcomes?
Where someone might misuse your trust, you know.
Where they might misuse your trust. But again, you know, always come from the perspective that, you know, actually people, you've recruited people because at the point that you recruited them, they were skilled and capable, they were the best person to do the job. So what happens over a period of time? It might be that you're a new manager, you've picked up a new team. With that has come some reputation around individuals, or you need to watch for this person because, you know, when they're working from home, they're watching Jeremy Kyle, or they're doing whatever they're doing the washing, you know. So is it that, you know, over a period of time you've made assumptions about individuals? I think it just really helps you to kind of unpick who you've got in your team, who's in which box, and really understand why.
So what are the features of where someone's performing really well, and what are you putting around them, and what are you allowing them to do, versus someone who may not be performing as well? What are you doing with them? Are you using the same approach, or, you know, something different? And what are their preferences as well? So there's lots of things to think about. So quite a simple thing, but once you start to unpick it, hopefully it will give you some ideas about what you could do differently. But again, have a look online. There are lots of tools that can help you do that. Or if you're a member of the FSB or looking to join the FSB, there are tools on their platform too. So things to think about when having difficult conversations, Pamela. Yeah.
So this is I suppose a précis of my 24 years experience in HR and managing you. Where you know, actually when I look at the number of conversations that I've had with managers over the years and gone, right, okay, what would have made this situation different? Having really clear performance objectives takes the emotion out of any conversation. So it takes it away from, you know, you're dealing with me in this way because I am, or, you know, because I am this, or because I am this. Actually, it's about saying, no, we've got some really clear goals here. You know, we agreed that certain things will happen at certain times. That hasn't been the case. You can remove the emotion. So I think once you set performance objectives for individuals, particularly if your organisation has an appraisal process, don't keep that to one conversation a year. That needs to be set the performance objectives, review it every month, every 2 weeks, and keep coming back to the performance objectives, so it takes the emotion away.
We shared some tools and tips in the last webinar, so if you want to find out how to set really clear objectives, have a look at the one that I believe is saved somewhere on the FSB website. I think just with anything, you know, make sure that you are looking for the assets as well as the things that are getting in the way. So, you know, try and structure conversations where you're, you know, identifying things that you're pleased about, because actually most of us do like a little bit of that kind of reward, don't we? So even if it is something very small, it might be they turn up every day at the right time, they're really consistent about it. I really appreciate that. However, when you turn up, you know, the things that you're doing may not be quite hitting the mark. Think about structuring a conversation, and, you know, it comes with practice, but having a really clear structure to the conversations that you want to have, especially if it's one where you need to really tackle a difficult issue. But again, with any structure, I'd start with, you know, the person's job description, personal specification, and also their performance objectives, because it takes the emotion out, as Pamela was saying.
But I think also it's about thinking before you have that conversation, what's the outcome that I'm looking for?
Yeah, that's right.
And am I going to get this outcome in this conversation, or am I going to get this outcome after 3 conversations? So sometimes it can be breaking it down into smaller conversations. Say, right, today we're going to revisit the performance objectives. The next time we have the conversation, we're going to tackle some of the behavioural issues. And on the third one, we're going to talk about improvements. So it's almost like you can break, what do they say? Chop the elephant down. That's not good, is it?
No, don't chop the elephant.
Don't chop the elephant.
Don't leave the elephant alone. But I think, yeah, just think planning, you know, it's tactical planning with people with complicated things, you know, you've got to listen, basically, is the next thing. Really listen to understand what's going on for them, which might be really difficult sometimes, because you might not like what you hear. But then, you know, try and manage your own emotions when you're going through that, which is listen, maybe don't respond to it, take some notes and reflect on that after the session, ready for the next one where you might tackle some of that feedback. And just say, you know, I've listened to what you said. You know, I need to take some time just to understand what that means for me and what it means for your role and for our organisation. And then next time you can come and provide some options for that person.
Yeah.
Key thing is no surprises. So just, you know, if someone, you know, sometimes you, not necessarily intentionally, but we can make a very difficult conversation a bit of a massive surprise. I didn't expect this was coming.
Yeah.
And I think touched on that earlier.
Which is where, you know, break the conversation down, you know, even if it's just half an hour, short half an hour bursts. And I think the important thing to remember is, because we try and preempt somebody's response to having feedback that's not necessarily positive, but I think they own their response to it, you own your response to it. So I think, you know, there's something about the more you can structure the conversations and make sure that in weekly, monthly one-to-ones, you're not getting into a situation where it's the first time somebody's heard something, so it comes as a surprise. If you walk into a one-to-one with somebody with a folder full of evidence, they're going to go,
no.
Why did I not know about this before? And that's oftentimes where you get into these tricky legal ER battles then around, well, you've instigated the disciplinary process, I'm going to instigate the grievance process, and then it becomes really messy. And
going back to that previous thing, you know, thinking about your own assumptions. We make assumptions. They're shortcuts, they're mental shortcuts that we all use to make sense of the world. It can be quite tricky. We've got some comments. Carrie's asked some questions. I'll come back to that in a second, Carrie. And then just the last point, we are running short on time. So
so I think this is really important. And I always say, you know, to managers, you've got to remember that everybody's kind of turned up to today at work from a different place. Everybody's got their own unique story. And I think oftentimes we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't know what people are experiencing at home. We don't know what people are experiencing in their personal life, which is where the listen to understand is really important, because sometimes in what people are saying, there are clues and cues about what's happening in their lives that may have led to performance issues.
So Carrie's just asking the last thing. Is this your trust of the employee or the employee's trust of you?
I think you could do it both ways.
Okay.
I think you could use it both ways.
Okay, all right. It's like any framework model, use it as it works for you. You know, they are, you know, there's always lots of research behind them, but they're there just to help you think, really, I think is the best way of looking at it. So typical performance conversations, you know, from our experience when we're working with companies, they're happening too late. You know, managers have chosen not to have the difficult conversation early on because they don't want to, sort of running away from it a little bit. You know, it's easy to sort of say, well, we're going to meet every month or every couple of weeks. And then, you know, there's a busy issue to deal with, which is a financial return or a supplier issue. You've got to get in a tender. You know, it sort of falls to one side as less important. Maybe that's not the case for all of you, but in our experience of working with companies, that quite often happens, which means that they're inconsistent. There isn't that flow, there isn't that evidence, there isn't that trail. And actually, from an employee point of view, no, I want to have that chat. I want to have that chat, you know. They're quite often rushed, not prepared, so people haven't really thought about the tactics of that conversation. So it's, you know, how are you getting on, what's going on, you know, have you delivered that stuff? You know, actually, what change do you need to see in that person? What are your planned tactics? What's happening with that person, you know, behind the scenes or at home, or, you know, what do you need to put in place? So really think about, you know, a good half hour before that one-to-one, really think about what outcomes that you want. And they can be quite emotional, quite often because they're late, they're not prepared. You know, something comes as a bit of a surprise. And so, you know, either you are frustrated or cross or a bit disappointed, and equally, you know, there'll be an emotional state held by that other person. So moving towards something that's a bit more planned, a bit more consistent and a bit more structured, hopefully remove some of that emotion. But it will always be emotional, especially when you're dealing with people who you perceive as underperforming. You know, that will always be emotional. So try this. Quick run through, Pamela.
Yeah, so set dates and times, like I say, and thank you, Carrie. Don't bite the elephant all in one go. You know, try and plan shorter conversations, even 15-minute conversations, but set dates and times. Plan and think about the words that you'll use, because words are really, really important. They can be, oftentimes they can either be, you know, really challenging, you know, words like evidence or
the word why.
Yeah, exactly.
The word why is really, really sort of inflammatory.
Why did you do that?
Yeah, and actually thinking about when you say something, maybe reflecting if someone does have a bit of a bad response to it, you know, maybe thinking about how could I restructure that next time. So actually giving yourself a bit of a chance to reflect on what happened.
Yeah, and prepare your own emotional state, you know, so if something's happened in the moment and you feel really cross about it, it's probably not a good time to have that conversation. You need to just give yourself a bit of time to prepare your own sort of emotional state, because what you want to be is as neutral in that conversation as possible. Think about how you're going to respond to challenge, and you know, I always say to managers, don't get too caught up in thinking about what somebody's going to do. If you're in the moment and you think, right, this conversation is becoming really quite difficult, then absolutely feel free to say, I'm going to close this conversation for now, we're going to come back to it. You know, don't feel that you've got to be sort of in the heat of the moment where somebody's, you know, getting really cross. Just bring the meeting to an end and reconvene it. And let go of trying to control how somebody might respond. Sometimes you might be surprised. Somebody might be really grateful for feedback. I think everybody just, you know, people generally want to do a good job, and as long as the feedback is constructive, doesn't have to be positive but constructive, you might get a very different response than you anticipate. And I think this is the killer one for me, is ask more than you tell. So if you look at coaching, and I've done this recently actually with somebody, is ask more than you tell. So, you know, how do you think you're doing? Why do you think you're doing well? What evidence have you got? What would your peers say about how you're performing? How might they feel about what you did? So if something's occurred, what you can say is, how, you know, what do you think your colleagues were feeling in that moment? How did it make you feel? And oftentimes they'll come up with the answers, and it's almost like, you know, you're encouraging somebody to talk about it rather than you have to say, this has happened, I'm not happy about it. They will kind of come to the conclusion themselves that something's not gone well. Yeah,
and I'd say, you know, two really good sort of courses maybe to explore. You know, maybe look at mediation. They learn some brilliant techniques in there to deal with tricky people, and also maybe look at coaching. There are lots of these sort of free short courses online, so maybe have a look at that as well. Those two things will help you really sort of structure your conversations and allow you to hold silence a bit more effectively as well, and actually provide that person a bit more space to think. So we're coming to a close now, but we'd like to ask you some questions, 2 more questions. The first one is, how frequently will you make time for one-to-ones, you know, from, you know, having listened to today? And then the second question is, how confident will you be having a different conversation as a result of, you know, today's session? So we'll just wait for the poll to load. Thank you. So they've got 2 polls there. If you could just click on one of those responses, recognizing that maybe they might not be the response you want, but, you know, try and get as close to something as you like. Again, we can't vote.
How confident are you having difficult conversations?
I think it depends. It really depends. It generally is how much time I had to plan to have that conversation. So if I'm going in cold, it's a lot harder. But if I've had a chance to really think about what am I trying to do, what evidence have I got, what happened before today, then actually I feel really quite a load confident. But, you know, I mean, I like to be really planned. You know, but typically, you know, fail to prepare, you know, prepare to fail is what they say. I'm not sure that's always true, but most of the time it's true. And, you know, in terms of one-to-ones, then, you know, one thing that as our company grows, we're going to have to really think about how we make time for that, and what are the consequences if we fail. You know, what happens? Do I tell you off? Probably. Okay. How frequently make time for one-to-ones? Okay. For those watching on a repeat, the first question was, how frequently do you make time for one-to-ones? Daily, the result was 9%. Weekly is 16%. Monthly is 63% of responses, and 13% don't manage people. And in terms of the second question, how confident will you be having a difficult conversation? 6% very, 47% confident, 41% confident, 3% not, and 3% don't have them. So a little bit of a shift. So that's great. It's like with any webinar, I wouldn't expect you to sort of go away from today with all the skills. You've got to practice this stuff. That's where you become much better at it and introducing some new techniques and approaches. I think just this quote again from someone anonymous, sometimes the most important conversations are the most difficult to engage in. So actually we might be deterred from having a difficult conversation, but actually really getting in there, it could really unlock someone, or it could really improve the performance of your company. So, being able to do that is key to, your business thriving and succeeding. So hopefully you found that interesting and useful, or at least, a nice start to the week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And just for those who are interested in data, before Ruth speaks, there are some links at the back, but we'll send those through at a later point.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Mark and Pamela.
Thank you.
That was a really interesting session. And I think really the point that came out for me is, if you have a problem with someone in your team, ignoring it is not going to make it go away. So no matter how uncomfortable it is, the earlier you can tackle it, the better, really, isn't it? And you can just maybe make it become less of an issue than if you sort of ignore it, keep your head down, hope it's going to go away. So so thanks for the tips on preparing us, so that if we do have to have those conversations, we know where to start. And I think there were some really good guidelines there. So as I said at the beginning, this session is being recorded and it will be available on the FSB on demand page, and the other two webinars are also available there too. So we will email you after this session with the link to that on demand page and also the slides from the session, so you have that all as your resources. You'll have the contact details for Mark and Pamela, so you'll be able to follow up with them if there's anything that you want to continue asking them about. And hopefully, well, I'm totally confident you will find that all really useful and feel much more prepared to manage your team. So thank you so much, Mark and Pamela. I just wanted to say, if you've enjoyed our session today, and we do a lot of these sessions, please, we'd be really grateful if you'd leave us a review on Trustpilot. As a membership organisation, it's really important to us that people realise the sort of support that we offer small businesses. So if you had time to do that, we would be really grateful. But we will leave you to get on with the rest of your day. Thank you so much for everyone who put the information in the chat or in the Q&A, the questions in the Q&A, and we hope your questions were addressed. And have a great rest of the week.